Rack mount preamps and effects, who doesn't love them? I did a video a couple of weeks ago called Rack is Back where I detailed 5 of my favorite rack mount preamps that I own. But to be honest, my favorite rack mountable preamp is the Axe-Fx 3. It is incredible. It's basically like having, several of those old Bob Bradshaw mega rigs in one 3 rack space unit. So let's use the Axe-Fx 3 to emulate some of those mega racks. We're actually just going to focus on some preamp tones because there are several rack mount preamps that are modeled in the Axe-Fx 3. Before we do, I'm playing my Les Paul with some excellent Martin A. Smith pickups, handmade here in Perth. Shout out to Martin because he does amazing work. If you guys like PAF style pickups, check them out because they transform this guitar and you're going to hear it in a second. We're going straight into the Axe-Fx 3. No post-processing. Let's start with a preamp model that is pretty dear to my heart, the Marshall JMP1. It's modeled in here as the JM Pre OD1, but there is a legacy model in the Axe-Fx 3 called Brit Pre. We're going to use these JM Pre models. In the early days of Ragdoll, I actually used to use a JMP1 together with a TC G Major and the highly divisive BBE Sonic Maximizer. That was my basic preamp rig, and I would run that into the power section of either a Marshall DSL or I had a Laney combo I used to cart around with me. And I really liked the JMP1, and I still do. If we have everything at the stock settings with the Axe-Fx 3, it sounds like this. It sounds pretty good. I like that. Of course, the Axe-Fx 3 here is not just emulating the preamp, it's paired together with a power amp model. If I remember correctly, the JM Pre models are paired with the same power amp model that the JCM 800 models have in here, which would explain why they sound pretty good straight up. So the original JMP1 has controls for bass, mid-range, treble, gain. The gain goes to 20 on those things because I guess that's 9 louder than Nigel Tufnell. And we've also got preamp presence here, which mimics the presence control on the physical preamp, and power amp presence, which would be like the presence control on, say, your head or your power amp. Of course, that's why it's called power amp presence. What I like to do with these models is I actually like OD1 the most. It's also modeled with something called the bass shift because there's a little button called bass shift on there. Let's hear that quickly. Kind of nice and thick, but I think I just prefer the kind of standard JM Pre 1. What I do like to do though is crank the master volume, so pull it up to about 6. I'll just drop the level a little bit just to kind of compensate and try to keep things at the same output. And that just kind of smooths everything out. It just makes it a little bit more Marshall-y in general. Now, the controls on the original preamp, I think, go to like plus or minus 6 on the bass, middle, or treble, and we actually have a little bit more range here. So you can play around with those and dial them in, but I like this at the stock settings with just the master volume bumped a bit, so I'm going to leave it there. By all means, experiment, play around with the drive control and the EQ and see what you get and see what you like. Let's move on to the second preamp on our list, the Soldano X88R, that purple preamp from the 80s as kind of popularized by players like Steve Lukather. I've never owned a Soldano X88, but if you head to Michael Nielsen's channel, you can watch his fantastic breakdown of his X88, and it sounds awesome. I had a preamp, basically, which was a clone of that preamp by Myasnikov, I think out of Penza in Russia, and he makes really affordable clones of a whole bunch of preamps. So his stuff is worth checking out as well. But we have these modeled as Solo 88. There's also the X99 model, the one with the motorized knobs and things, but I like Solo 88 lead This one, again, because it's a preamp, is modeled with the power section from the Soldano SLO100. Stock settings. That's pretty good already. Let's, for my liking, and I do this on my Soldano Hot Rod 50 as well, is just dip the treble a little bit, push the bass and the mid-range, and these things have so much gain. You can bring the gain back a little bit. I love that on the neck pickup there, the way that just gets so fat and creamy. All right, let's do this. Let's add some pitch detune using the pitch block. And I've got a kind of circular delays thing going on here to kind of mimic the old Lexicon PCM70, just to make it really wet and juicy. Probably a little bit too heavy on the old detune there. I'm going to bring the input gain to about 50%. Let's try it now. I like that a lot. So let's leave that. I'm going to hit save on that and save that scene. Of course, if you want like ridiculous amounts of gain, there's ridiculous amounts of gain too. Ridiculous amounts of gain is fine by me. Let's go over to scene 3, because we have two models from the Bogner Fish preamp. Most people probably associate the Fish with the brown mode because it was used by Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains. Now, the brown mode, I've never really kind of vibed with. At the stock settings, we have this. It's okay, you can definitely get some usable tones out of it, but I much prefer the Strato mode on this. It sounds way more appealing at stock settings, and I just find it a bit easier to dial in, so I'll do that. So try the Strato mode if you want to try out the Fish. Let's go to scene 4. The next preamp is the Custom Audio Electronics 3 Plus preamp. Bradshaw, basically, but I believe these were actually made by John Suhr. So there's a couple of kind of key players in this whole rack business, and I feel like we've now covered all of them. Soldano, John Suhr, Bob Bradshaw, they're kind of central to all of these classic things. We have models of the clean rhythm and lead channel. I don't mind the just straight up clean channel for a very neutral kind of clean set. That's fine. Maybe just add a little bit of kind of bass and a little bit of mid-range to that. We've of course got the rhythm and the lead channel. The lead channel is pretty saturated. But I think my favorite mode out of all of them, the one that has the most character to me anyway, is the rhythm channel. And if you kind of crank the gain and add a bit of treble and mid-range, you got a cool crunch sound. And again, you kind of add some delay. You can maybe add a boost in the amp block to that as well. Let's just add the CC boost. That's my favorite boost. And then you got a really nice, thick, creamy lead sound. That's kind of the theme we have going here, right? Not exactly the mode I would go for out of all of these preamps. It's not my favorite one, but I do like it, and it does have its own character going on. Alrighty, let's move over now to the fifth. We're going to do 8 of these. The mighty Mesa Triaxis, and the clean mode is a really, really good clean mode. Probably my favorite clean from a preamp. That's it straight up. I would probably just dip a little bit of bass, add a little bit of treble, and you can kind of push the input drive on these. Pitch detune, chorus, multi-delay, absolute magic right there. But it can do really nice, kind of spanky, organic, clean tones as well. But we're not here to do that. We're here to go nuts with effects as well. So if you want that 80s pristine clean, that's a great way to do it. If you really want that plastic 80s kind of thing, add a studio compressor. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but bypass the cabinet because you get this. It kind of has that old 80s Rockman sound going on there, but I kind of liked the sound without the compressor and with the cabinet there. By the way, the cabinet I'm using, you can get for free on Axchange, LT Brit 4x12 V30 mix. Check it out, try it for yourself, or you can try out any of the factory cabs. There's some really great sounding ones there as well. All right, we are onto the Triaxis lead to yellow mode. Most people who buy a Triaxis, myself included, want it for this mode. At stock settings, it's fine, but it doesn't have that Mark series thing. So these are a little bit tricky to dial in, and the Triaxis has something called dynamic voice, which is this kind of like preset graphic EQ, kind of weirdly implemented. I wish the original had a graphic EQ. And on the Axe-Fx, we have the Mark series EQ in there, which is awesome. So let's do this. Overdrive all the way up. Dip the bass, dip the mids, crank the treble. I like to add a little bit of preamp presence, but I turn the power amp presence down. This is just kind of my preference here. And then let's go to the EQ and give it a kind of, the classic Mesa V-shape thing. Not that much of a dip. I normally go like -3 for the 240 band. That's kind of the really touchy one. And give that one a bit of a rip there. This is kind of more of what we think of when we think of a Triaxis or a Mark series. That's a little bit more like it. You can go to the preamp tab and add, the ideal tab and add the fat switch, and that's really nice for lead stuff. wonderful, wonderful amp model. The Mark series and the Triaxis models are some of my favorite high gain sounds ever, especially in the Axe FX3. They're awesome. All right, we still have two more to go. Let's do this one, the Peavey Rockmaster. There's not a model of the Rockmaster in here, but this was kind of the dark horse candidate in the Rack is Back video that I did. So we're going to use the 5150 model, and we'll just make one tweak. The Rockmaster has this active EQ. So let's go to the preamp and change the tone stack to an active tone stack. Everything's kind of going to get turned up. So I'll just dip the overall level a little bit. This is what the 5150 sounds like with an active tone stack. Which kind of reminds me of the Rockmaster. What's going to happen now is when we're using the EQ, we're boosting or cutting. So it's not a traditional sort of like guitar style tone stack. If you want more of something or less of something, this is basically now like just kind of a little graphic EQ or something like that. So dip the mids a little bit, give it a little bit of bass. That's already kind of bright enough, and we get now the Rockmaster does some pretty cool cleaner tones, and if we do that and we switch to the neck pickup here, turn the input drive down, it's kind of doing that. So that makes me think that the real world Rockmaster and Peavey 5150 preamps aren't that far away from one another. Let's just bring that input drive up a bit for this. Very, very nice. Let's do the Van Halen thing, bit of pitch detune. I like that. I'm going to roll with that for the Rockmaster. And last but certainly not least, the ADA MP1. There is no model for the ADA MP1 in the box yet. I really hope Fractal model one at some point. I've said this before, but I have 3 ADA MP1s. If Fractal want one, they can have one and they can model it for everybody. The offer is on the table, but until then, we're going to use something called the Big Hair model. This essentially is like an idealized, model, which doesn't exist in the real world. It's Fractal's version of that thing we normally associate with the late 80s and often the ADA MP1. So what we got to do to this to kind of get it happening is what I found is if you just go straight up, go to the preamp, turn the tone stack frequency down to 500 Hertz. Let's hear it without changing anything, and then I'll hit enter and that will drop the tone stack frequency. The last one is kind of an advanced tweak in here because the ADA MP1 has a presence control that's really like a 4th EQ control. What I found is if you like double the presence frequency on this kind of gets you more in that ballpark. So on an ADA, I would push the bass and maybe dip the treble a little bit, dip the mids, and bring the presence up. The presence is really going to serve as our treble control. And again, because we don't have a specific MP1 model in there, this is just kind of ballpark, but you can kind of tweak it, and rather than go, I want to sound exactly like an ADA MP1, think of your favorite record that uses an ADA MP1, whether it's the First Extreme album or it's White Lion or it's Skid Row or something like that. Just keep in mind those albums had a whole bunch of post-processing going on. So in this case, the kind of cabinet that you choose and then things like the delay, chorus, EQ, all that downboard stuff is going to be very important as well. But let's hit save on that. I'm going to share this preset on Axchange if you want to try it. Try it with your guitars, tweak it to your liking, use it basically as kind of like a starting point or a reference point on getting some great old school rack tones. Thanks so much for watching the video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay excellent, be good to one another. I'll see you then.